All right, so this time let's go over the different polars for every type, kind of going in with my own assessment that Rusted Typology gave, and I think he put a pretty good video together, rather well done. There's just some little tidbits I think that he might have missed out on or whatever, some little contributions that I might put in there. So let's just go into it.
Of an estate, the more ruthless impersonal individual who will violate your personal boundaries as if they don't matter. That's just one side of the polar, and it's just represented in the SE as they're both different. So with an SLE, the bigger issue here is getting backstabbed, betrayed by others because you don't know how to judge people's character. You don't pay attention to people's character. And this is really visible with SLEs throughout history. You've seen SLEs throughout history. Many of them maybe let someone in their inner circle. Maybe something happened and they got betrayed for that. They pay the price. So that is something that happens with us quite often. We don't make character judgment.
And of course, we had to have a commercial. All right, so important things to get already on what he's saying here. I think you actually have to kind of say that one of the bigger issues that SLEs can have with the FI polar, he kind of glossed over it in the beginning, and then he moved into betrayal problems. Now, makes sense to me that this is very much from an SLE's point of view. This is what an SLE probably is more concerned with, that they get betrayed, and that would be a negative outcome for them, right? So it makes sense that that's probably something he preferred to focus on. And he's sort of glossing over one of the main problems with FI polar is the repression of FI. Looking at FI things as not being important, not being valued. Somebody's personal subjective feelings on a thing, um, and how somebody may value their FI things over TI. That is something SLEs just they don't often understand that. They don't like that. To them, they're like, no, FI stuff, FI reasoning is bullshit and is stupid, and I'm going to stomp that out, which he kind of alludes to later on. In some ways, from an FI person's point of view, they might look at what the SLE is talking about here and view him as Darth Vader and the evil empire trying to create order in the galaxy, because order and structure matters more than individuality and individual points of view. That's the way it can be perceived. And therefore, this is something that an FI polar, like an SLE in particular, may run into these problems. This is why in socionics, SLEs can often look a lot like your stereotypical ENTJ in MBTI world, that dominating mastermind, evil emperor kind of thing. SLEs can become that. You can have a Napoleon character, for example, okay, which is considered SLE, certainly is in my book, and there's like out to dominate everybody. This is the way it is. Okay. So anyway, I think that was kind of amusing that he sort of inverted what probably is the bigger issue for SLE, looking at it from his point of view. But of course, can't fault the guy for that. He's an SLE.
Person is this a bad person? If you don't do those character judgments, it's really hard to avoid getting backstabbed. But as an SLE also has an issue with judging that psychological closeness, not only how close he is to people, how people feel about him, how he feels towards people. That's also problematic for an SLE. And I think they're overall going to have a more impersonal approach to people. Likes your dislikes, that FI polar makes it difficult to judge things like that. Things are judged more impersonal. When ILE, FI polar,
Back to kind of what I was saying there. They don't understand EFI stuff. They're approaching things very impersonal. It's very cold. They may come across as very cold and impersonal, right? These can be seen as flaws, as weaknesses by other types that do value the emotionality, the connection to somebody, etc. SLEs may also run into the problem of having a little bit of the Chad problem and doing it inadvertently. They don't mean to do it. They just don't fully understand where their relationship is at. And so they may hook up with the wrong sort of person for the wrong kind of reason, or miss out on an opportunity because they didn't judge the psychological distance. So they may enter into these problems of relationships because of this kind of stuff. And it's not betrayal necessarily. Doesn't mean the person betrayed him. It just means you didn't really understand just quite where you stood with that person and how strong and how good a connection you really had with that person emotionally and so on. Right. So just issues with relationships. Same is going to apply with ILEs, which he's about to get into. Difficulty understanding where you stand with that other person. It can lead to a lot of relationship problems, being with the wrong person, or just missing out. You didn't go after and pursue someone that maybe you should have because you actually were closer than you thought. Just misjudged it. That's the thing. Let's carry on.
One that's quite different. It is comes with the almost awkwardness of social convention. Those are the kinds of people who make a joke, maybe on a funeral, make a distasteful joke on a funeral. Everyone's like, oh, I don't know this. So that's something that they do.
True, very
but
likely.
FI polar with an ILE is much more harmless. It's not as damaging as the FI polar because
Also
it's
true.
not combined with the SE base. Now, one thing I've noticed different with ILE and SE, yeah, their polar function, is that an SLE hard a time with getting betrayed, right? I've noticed I don't think ILE struggle that much. And I think that might be because of their evaluation. They might judge potential much better. So even if they're FI polar, I think they have an advantage. Another thing with ILEs I've noticed, their geekism, is that they're
Also
very
true.
indifferent. In fact, I would say that they're much more neutral than SLE. When SLE is neutral on a sentimental level, not neutral on an ideological, not neutral on you're more on my side, you're against that kind of level. You know, you share my belief, you share my opinion, you're my group, you know, you're my circle. They're very personal in that sense because they care about the collective. Now and then, ILE, from what I've noticed, that they don't care about that. They're completely neutral. They don't get involved in sides. The ILE, like what side? There's no sides here. There's no side. Just the truth and the irrational. So that's the one thing I don't like about ILE much. Some of you might think, oh, but that's a
yeah, and what he's getting into now is more of a beta quadra values versus alpha quadra values. In a nutshell, the alpha quadra types, like an ILE, yeah, they may throw some ideas out there that are unpopular. It's not liked. They may be a stickler for the rational truth. This is what it is. This is the reasoned, well-reasoned argument, you know, etc. But at the end of the day, they're not interested in enforcing those things, not interested in pushing that onto the world. They may simply be discussing something purely hypothetical, just a theory. It's just something to talk about, but they have no interest in actually implementing. Here, beta quadra values, and especially SLE, this is SE and TI now together, they want to actually implement those views. They want to enforce them. They want to push it out onto the world and make others adhere to their viewpoint, adhere to their structure, their order. That's where they can have a little bit of that evil empire kind of approach. So it's very much a you're either with me or you're against me. You're on my side or you're not. You're the opposing team and you must be defeated. You must be broken down and beaten down. Essentially what he's about to get into. And this is basically just beta quadra values versus alpha quadra. Again, alpha, very cheerful, playful. They're not interested in hurting people or taking over or dominating or governing anything. That's not their focus. They're just enjoying hypothetical conversation. Betas, no, it's not just hypothetical. It's we believe this and we believe that we need to push this onto the world.
Who trade the camp? Someone being so neutral is a good. No, it's not. I'm not here for neutrality. Like I'm not here for some key neutral. But like, oh, someone insulted my friend. I don't want to jump in and start a fight because they didn't do that to me. No, not that deep. I have no tolerance for that. Zero whatsoever.
See?
I don't like SE. So
See? You're either on my side or you're not. He even brought up this is a fight. Are you going to come in and join us on our fight or not? You know, it's much more aggressive. That's just beta and alpha kind of viewpoint, but still all applies for FI polar, right? Carry on.
TI polar and TI polar, both TI polar types, right? So with SEs, I believe that TI polar is masked a bit better. We usually associate TI polar stereotypes with I would say more so.
Yes.
With SE, the basic principle here is that we we do what works.
Absolutely.
So we don't inhibit ourselves with rules and procedures, right? That's how an SE believes. That's what we think. What works goes. Something doesn't work. What's the point of doing it? So there's more of that focus on pragmatism. The rules are meant to kind of play with. They're not going to really inherently care about those things. They just care about getting a certain result, and that's about it. So not really following any specific code, not following any specific kind of guidelines and hierarchy that they create, the order. They're not interested in any of that.
Which essentially is also very gamma quadra values. Overall, all the gammas are going to kind of connect with that basic breakdown here. The TI polar, though, you could see it sometimes where there is a lack of structure, a lack of consistency in how that individual is approaching. And with the SEE, over time, you may really see that there's just a complete lack of adhering to any specific structure. They're really picking whatever works at that time and in that moment. When it's really bad, you can see that. When it's not terribly bad, you still notice that there is a little bit of a chaos to how they go about doing it. Very much picking things here and there, and sometimes even playing favorites. They're not providing a clear-cut law. This is the law, and everyone is subject to those same exact rules, no matter whether you're my friend or not, no matter the circumstances, whatever. SEE is perhaps the most likely of those gammas to just say, no, I'm treating people quite differently based on either the situation, the context, or whether they are my friend or not, or they're somebody who's close to or whatever. They're far more likely to disregard that universal blanket approach. This is where the gammas and betas are going to kind of like really clash with each other a bit. I made a comment a moment ago that SLEs can look like the evil empire, some Darth Vader, Emperor Palpatine bringing order to the galaxy. SEE is a really great archetype to be the opposite of that, to be your Luke Skywalker hero. I'm not saying Luke Skywalker is an SEE, clarifying that, but that kind of heroic person that is trying to overturn the established order, that can't stand this kind of imposed order to everything, where your individuality is almost stamped out. It may feel to an SEE like they're fighting the board, and they do not want to be assimilated by the board. They want to allow for individuality and their own talent and merit to take them as far as it can go. Andor is probably more likely an SE in my book. Just throwing that out there. That's a maybe, but I think so. So SEE and SLE can really kind of clash with each other in this sense. In this kind of very archetypical.
Not at all. Now, that's not to say that SEs are criminals because they don't care about the law. They don't care about the rules. That's not true at all. They will play with much more. I would say want to bend the rules because they have no. Now you introduce a rule, and SE might ask, "Okay, sure, but what's the benefit of it? Or I gain something?" No, it's just great order, or maybe it's the principle that you need to live up to because life maybe has meaning when you apply some principle. And SE is like, yeah, what meaning? Fucking home. Not on my watch. So SE is not gonna care about that. Now their TI polar also manifests their impulsivity, in their quite disorganized way of going about things. Again, they're not focused on order, hierarchy, not interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
Much more personal, extremely rebellious. That's one.
Right, yeah, and there we go. Rebellious against the evil empire. Right. Key point though, an SLE, for example, or somebody with high TI usage can create order, can create structure, create the system of laws that is going to govern how you're going to do things and the procedures that are going to go into it. They can really create that and enforce it and want to keep it going. An SEE is less likely to really create order and structure. That's another very noticeable way that you see the difference. An SEE can sometimes follow the rules, can be aware of the rules, can do that. They're not always disregarding rules, but they are often a type that really does not build structure. So if you had an SLE and an SEE, both in positions of authority, the SLE will definitely try to create structure, rules, and order and want people to follow that protocol. Even though SLEs sometimes rebel against order when they don't like it, but they will create it and expect others to follow it. SEEs, on the other hand, will often not create order and structure. Okay, and if they try to, they might create a very flimsy, very loose kind of order, just enough that it's practical to have some kind of structure. So it's not total chaos, but it's very loose. It's kind of weak. There's a lot of loopholes and gaps and all kinds of stuff. And it's also very likely to, um, they're not likely to really uphold the rules very much. Like they just kind of threw something on paper, here are the rules, yeah, whatever, and put it out there. But then they don't really do much to actually enforce those kind of rules, where an SLE would. Okay, that's another big difference between the two of them and a good way to spot them. It's particularly again when they are in charge of something. And unfortunately, you're not always going to see them when they're in charge of things, maybe not in charge of anything. Uh, but you will notice that more. Okay, so that's how the TI polar can manifest in an SEE. Here we go.
Think you need to know about extremely rebellious type. By far, in my opinion, the most rebellious type of all. Like I've known some that are
Probably.
extremely rebellious. Like they do not care about social conventions. They have no issues going. Although
all the
a
gammas.
little pointed there, depends on your enneagram type. 3 is going to be more of a conformist. 8, not at all. With an IEE, that TI polar, it's easy to jump to those stereotypes. They're kind of all over the place,
Yep.
flying helicopters, whatever. But it's
Yep.
not that simple. I think their NE base makes them even more scattered. Yes, because they're always operating on a conceptual level. That's where their creativity really starts to shine. They have that NE really expanding on the horizon and always being very extremely abstract. But there's no TI to ground them. There's no TI to kind of tell them, okay, let's categorize. Let's put things in categories A, B, C.
Mm-hmm.
None of that. None of that systemized information. It's just pure. Think of it like freedom. That's what it is. Having no TI in that sense is freedom. It's a creative freedom, and everything goes. Things just go.
Yeah.
While with TI, it wants things to go, but they always want to be checked logically, checked in a very organized fashion. So that's what makes it different. But
yeah, and adding to that, he's absolutely right. Because the NE is far more abstract and in the realm of abstract, just ideas, possibilities, what it could be. It's not constrained by the sensory reality of it, right? Whereas for an SEE, there is a constraint because you have SE instead of NE. And the SE is going to naturally constrain things based on what is realistic, what is the natural order, right? There is just natural order to the physical realm. So, in other words, it's kind of like saying, well, it's not about what it could be or should be. It's just, look, this is what it is. That particular thing weighs a certain amount, and the human body could only possibly lift so much weight. That's a constraint. That's a natural constraint that we see in the physical realm. We're aware of this concrete law, essentially, this concrete reasoning. Okay. Or a human person can only run so fast. So it doesn't matter what other possibilities you're coming up with. Look, there's a natural constraint based on just simply observing what's around you. You can only move so fast. The physical order of things, physical structure, physical concrete things kind of inherently has rules and constraints to it. SE people are going to be very mindful of that. So that naturally keeps them more grounded, keeps them a little bit more from flying off the rails with insane ideas. But NE is pure abstract. It's pure what if. Well, what if a person could run faster than a speeding train? Well, what if we put rockets on their back and made them, and it just keeps going and going, gets crazier and weirder, where there is no constraint. So now it really looks like this person is just boundless energy, bubbly as he's describing, and there's just no structure, no rules to them. That's one reasoning that goes along with what he's saying.
Much more scattered than the SE for sure. That's where the TI base, the TI
doesn't care about the concrete realities. It's just what possibilities.
More unstable lifestyle again. It's going to be a bit more random, more chaotic than an SE. Now, let's move to NI polar. We have ESC and LSE. Now, with an ESC, very focused on the moment, being in the moment, having a good time, emotional expression in the moment. And often it seems that they're not very introspective type. They're not going to sit down and try to introspect. They're going to sit down and try to kind of figure behind things, read in between the lines. They're not interested in that. They don't want that. Very expressive in the moment, one day taking things at face value and not being drawn to introspection. Just not being drawn to introspection.
You do tend to notice that a lot.
Thinking about things on a deeper level, meaning of life. They just go to those points also, right? Not to say, obviously,
or they're just not interested. They just don't do it.
People of any introspection. It's just something that you don't think much about. Just in the moment, expressing yourself in the moment, and lacking that kind of more abstract depth, I would say. With LSE, it's very interesting because they're based. This is the type of individual that there should be more hours in the day, right? So again, issues with time, as much things in their schedule, trying to deal with all of those things, and then not being able to deal with them because they don't know how to kind of schedule them correctly, how to manage the time, and there's always going to be frustration with those things. Their attitude.
I don't know if I agree with that one so much, but what you can say is that both types, ESE and LSEs, are types that often have a hard time picking one specific path and say, this is the way to go. That's what it's going to be. This is what we should focus on, or the outcome, and so on. Forget about all the other possibilities. Let's just focus on this thing right here. That's the long-term objective that we're trying to get at, because that's what's going to happen. So they may be capable of seeing the possibilities, the possible options, the different outcomes, different things that could come about, and so on, especially in the future, but not really know which is the one most likely future or the most significant one that we should be working towards and focused on. Okay, being able to pick that particular thing is where they can kind of get lost, and they end up sort of just preparing for everything. It's kind of like, let's not focus on, what the future may hold 10 years from now so much. Let's kind of stick to what we have in front of us and do the best we can of what we have, prepare everything for all possible contingencies and anything that could go wrong, and that's it, right? Rather than picking one particular path, one particular thing to focus on. Okay? That's usually kind of where it manifests, particularly more so with the LSEs. They can be just much more less likely to just speculate about what's going to happen, where things are going, where things are trending, and this is the most likely way it's going to go. They can have some issues with that. The ESE, I do kind of agree with them that a lot of times they don't demonstrate a lot of this forward thinking on this is what's going to happen, this is where things are going, this is the deeper meaning or the abstract stuff. They just don't seem to really spend a lot of time in that area. It's like they just don't really think about it. Right? They don't really seem to care to. So doesn't mean they can't, like he said, they just don't seem to do it right. So I'm like, yeah, for the most part, yeah. And they're not very focused on what is the deep, profound thing that we need. What is the deeper overall meaning to life that we all need to kind of move towards and so on. Nah, they're more interested in like getting things done in the here and now.
Kind of reality is again extremely pragmatic, extremely realistic. What it is, there's no focus on let's read them between the lines, let's add additional subjective meaning. They don't care about any of that. They're absolutely practical individuals who, if it's not based on factual information, factual data, evidence, and reality, then that's not the truth at all. It just doesn't matter. Then we have Te polar, which is IEI. And
for the LSEs, I agree with that last part. You need some data, you need some truth. They don't want to speculate on where it's going very much. They can do it sometimes on maybe a topic that they particularly like, if they find it fun to do so, then they'll do that a little bit more. But if not, they don't like playing the speculation game. That this is where I think it's actually going to be. This is where we need to focus. They don't really like doing it. Show me the data. Show me the proof that it's really going to do that. And if you can't, then they're sort of ignoring you. They don't really care.
SEI. Now, not to be, of course, I don't know SEI much, and sadly, I didn't sit down to read anything. Maybe, yeah, should have probably. But anyway, I'm
Well
sure
done,
some
sir.
SEIs
Well
will
done.
explain what the T-folder looks like. But I'll give my own take too. So IEI, it is the most stereotypical T-folder in my opinion. That's because of NI base. So you have that NI base, which is extremely abstract, finding meaning, finding pattern, destiny, fate, connection, connecting different concepts to one.
True.
Those things will be present with an IEI. Very idealistic. So you combine all of that. That's not to say an IEI can only be an idealist who lives in his own world and cannot like do basic things or work or actually save money or do anything that's pragmatic. No, it's just their overarching theme is based around idealism. How they judge the world is based around that NI and that TI rather than right. So with them, selectiveness of facts. Sometimes they can be extremely distrustful of factual information.
So
they
true.
will struggle with
with
knowing what's correct, what's not correct, what's true, what's not true. When maybe skimming text, what's useful, what's not useful. So that quick thinking in the moment, articulating in the moment, explaining in the moment, coming up with facts, with information quickly. This is something that all IEIs have known struggle with.
Oh yes. Oh my God, and we had to have this one. Absolutely. He's absolutely right. That is something that they are terrible at. That's something they're really terrible at. Just that ability to speak on the fly, in the moment, be quick. Often very terrible at that, and in particular, really, really terrible also at using examples. That's another key piece. When you kind of say, okay, I hear what you're saying, I hear the points you're trying to make, but now give me an example, a concrete, real example of what you're referring to. Give me examples in history or examples of specific instances of that happening and so on to support your argument. Concrete examples of those. A lot of IEIs can be absolutely atrocious at that. Some, when they're really bad, I mean, they got nothing. They really got nothing. Others can kind of give you an example here and there, but it could take a while. It can be a little difficult, or they're sort of cherry picking little examples here and there. In many cases, when you try to show other examples where their argument does not work, where their viewpoint doesn't make sense, because you have actual evidence, you have examples in history, you have examples of instances where it doesn't work, it doesn't make sense, whatever. They can often blow that off and say, nah, it doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. I'm sticking with my viewpoint on it. I don't care how many examples you demonstrate of something not working, it doesn't matter. And they can be extremely stubborn because of it. Another area with the IEIs is many of them may really like to focus on philosophy or idealistic, almost philosophical like ideas to things, to how life should be, how society should be, how people should grow, how people develop. That's something they tend to like. This is what we should all be doing to evolve and be better, and so on. And they think that it's kind of a universal thing that works for everybody. Not caring about maybe what they're talking about and what they're interested in is not very practical. It's difficult to implement because of the lack of resources or the lack of understanding or other real world constraints that would make it just not practical to try to deal with. They may just not care about that, completely be like, whatever, it doesn't matter. Um, they may be dealing in a realm that is very philosophical and abstract, which is something that you need other people to almost be taking care of all the concrete, real world, practical stuff for you so that you have the time to sit around pondering philosophical existentialist all this other kind of stuff, right? Kind of it's difficult to be pondering a lot of this stuff when you're busy trying to work and make money and do all these other things, right? You need somebody to kind of almost be supporting you. This is also another type that may struggle a lot at knowing how to do day-to-day things, knowing how things get done, how those parts in your car work and everything kind of does this and that and the other, how the economic system works and one thing goes from here to there and there, how actual diplomacy and governance happen, right? The actual how does it really work in reality. IEIs may completely ignore all that or downplay that, thinking that's not important. This philosophical idea is what is important, and that's what we should be doing, even if we don't actually know how to make it a reality. But we should strive for it anyway. You know, they do a lot of that kind of stuff too, and that's where you see the complete lack of DE.
I is great from sitting down, let just articulating those thoughts, writing them down, and later on putting them out in the world. But when it comes to a quick debate, they will struggle completely because again, this all that NI, all that TI, just time to process. So coming up with quick information from get-go can be a big struggle for 9i. There can be a tendency kind of not be that interested when it comes to what is our objective information. In fact, they're more interested in personal, more interested in how they, there's just more to the world than what AI. That's the mentality of 9i. They don't want to lose that mentality. They don't want that people rather have that meaningful, very NI based mentality them some peace in life, right? So with SCI, I think them being more historical and grounded can make it less polar. But I believe because of that,
Yes,
and them not being SC value, they can be much less ambitious, much less, which is, I know, it's a surprise to many people. Dualize AI is shit. I'm not even going to lie to you. Dualize AI is a scary motherfucker. That's what it is. It's not a joke. Like the
I don't know
SE is
about that,
there.
but
You never confuse it with the AI. Never million. When SEI, there's this SI
at
base
least I've
and
never
E
really seen that.
politics. They kind of well off time and indulging in comforts and being kind of comfortable and engaging in very it's very easygoing and but struggling with the efficiency with their time, struggling with the time into something productive rather than being cozy and nice. So I think that's my impression. Maybe if,
Yeah, again, similar problems to the IEI. The SEI can just have difficulty understanding the how something works, um, particularly if it's not something that they have been trained on. It's not their job, you know, because they'll understand that. But a lot of other things, they may have a hard time understanding how the things work and then how to implement them in a practical way, right? Meaning a way that is going to work where we have the resources, we have the time, we have the necessary people and components to do it, and it can get done in a reasonable amount of time, right? All of that is something that goes into implementing something in a quote practical way. Like, you can try to come up with something that's a great idea and it's beautiful and so on, but maybe it takes too much time, maybe it takes too many resources, just too damn expensive. Therefore, it's not practical, impractical to do. TE types are far more likely to understand that, finding the sweet spot of investing just the right amount of time, the right amount of resources, the right amount of effort to achieve an optimal outcome in the end. Right? That's where the word efficiency kind of gets into. Is it efficient? Right? This is where TE polar types again can mess this up. They're very inefficient at where they're going with certain. And you could see that again with SDIs. You could see that with IEIs. I agree again because of the sensory aspect with SEIs that helps them still have certain understanding of how things work a little bit better in the real world because they can see concretely this is how the thing has been shown to work. This is the physical object and the limitations of those objects. These are the physical people and what those people are capable or not capable of doing. So it is focused a little bit more on day-to-day stuff, on how things can operate in the real day-to-day concrete world. Whereas IEIs tend to like ideas and philosophies and concepts and so on that really have no limits. It's completely theoretical. So they really can go off the rails.
If I'm wrong, correct me in the comment section. Write down how did the polar of SCI manifest. We have then SC polar. Now,
okay, I'm gonna do a second part video because I think this is really long. So for those interested, they can watch the second part, and so on. Do it that way. How's that for efficiency? If I can actually figure out what I'm doing.